Okay, so this is a first video in a series on the different AP World History course themes. So this first theme is the social theme. So the way that I'm going to introduce these themes is by talking about what we mean when we talk about social stuff. And I'm going to give you a good example of how this works in one of the major regions that we're going to be talking about throughout the year. So, when we talk about social stuff today, we're going to be talking about India. Now, India, when we think about India, is a separate country. Pretty much when we're thinking about India at this point in time, we're thinking about South Asia. So when we think about India, it's kind of synonymous with South Asia, although today, what is now in India encompasses India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. You might consider part of Afghanistan. This area of the world. So that's what we're going to be looking at here when we think about society and social stuff. We're going to be using India as an example of how we see the social stuff play out. So before we talk about India specifically, let's talk about what is in the social side of history. So generally speaking, when we think about the social stuff, we're going to think about hierarchies. And these might be social classes, and they might also be economic classes. You'll often find that these two things go together. So the higher social class you are, typically the higher economic class you are. But the thing that unites them is this idea of a class of people. So typically when we think about high class people, high social standing, they usually have high economic standing too. And the same goes for the opposite. People at the lower part of society are usually also at the lower end of the economic spectrum. So very typically, one of the things that we'll see in this class are social hierarchies. So I'm going to draw a triangle. And the triangle is going to be the different social hierarchies. So I'm going to divide this triangle into 4 pieces. Now, this is a very, very general social hierarchy. So lots of different places are going to have different variations of this hierarchy. But generally speaking, this is what we see when we think of a general social hierarchy. So at the top of the social hierarchy is going to be the ruling class. Now, the ruling class might be very large, it might be very small. So in some places, it might be the ruler and his family and the advisors, maybe their families. Like it could be a very large number of people. Or in some cases, it might just be the leader. So somewhere in between like having a very large ruling class or just a very, very small ruling class, it might be somewhere on that spectrum. Usually beneath the ruling class are the people that kind of make sure that the ruler stays the ruler. And so in this case, usually it's military and religious leaders. Military and religious leaders are usually found here because they make sure that the ruling class stays the ruling class. So these guys run the military, so they run the army to protect the leader. And the religious leaders show a connection between the leader and the gods. So these guys support the ruling class. They make sure that the ruling class stays the ruling class. Beneath these guys, this is where you find your money people. This is where you find rich people. Rich people typically
Hey, teachers and staff, I just want to thank you for a great day. I will be sending out an email later on this afternoon, early evening, but overall it was fantastic. Thank you, Bulls. Have a great night.
So, merchants, maybe farmers, like if they own a lot of land, so like landowners. But these are people who have money. Beneath these people are your regular average, work-a-day worker people. Here you would have farmers who are not landowners, laborers, cooks, etc. Like people who are just regular people. They're not rich, so this is generally, if we want to think about these people, they're poor people. We might also consider them to be peasants. That's what we're going to call those people. And then underneath these guys, usually at the bottom of the pyramid, this is where you would find people who are on the fringes of society. So you'd find slaves, criminals, people like that. And very typically, this is what you'll find in just about every society we're looking at. So when we think about hierarchies, social hierarchies, that's what we're seeing here. Another really important social thing, especially something that we're going to be seeing more as we move through the course, maybe not so much at the beginning, but as we move kind of into the middle of the course, another big social thing is going to be gender. So most of what we're seeing in terms of gender or gender relations is patriarchy. So we're seeing a lot of patriarchy. Pretty much across the board, men are in charge. Pretty much 100% across the board, men are in charge. There are a few small exceptions, and the biggest exception to this would probably be sub-Saharan Africa. It's not that men aren't in charge in sub-Saharan Africa, it's that you're more likely to see female leaders. And when we eventually get to talking about sub-Saharan Africa, we will talk about that specifically. All right, so there are a few exceptions to this general hierarchy. So let me give you one exception before we start talking about India. So one exception to the general hierarchy is in China. And we'll talk more about China later this week. But in China, merchants are seen at the bottom of society. So in China, this hierarchy works pretty much the same, except that merchants are going to be found at the bottom, kind of above slaves and criminals. And the reason for that is that merchants do not contribute to society. They only make money, which gives them power, but doesn't really do anything for anyone. Okay, so for our purposes here, when we think about social stuff, we're thinking about social classes, so like these. We're thinking about economic classes, which pretty much coincide with these. And we're also thinking about gender relations. And at this point in history, everything is pretty patriarchal. Okay, so let's talk about India. Let's look at India as an example of how this social stuff works. So India as an example. So one of the things that's very interesting about India is that India never really has a strong, unified government. So government is used to help keep order. India really has never had a strong, unified government, not until the British show up. Do they actually get anything that the rest of the world would recognize as a strong, unified government? And so the British show up in like the 1700s. So what India used instead of a strong political order is that they had a very strong social order. So for India, the social hierarchy kept order. So this kind of social hierarchy is what kept order in India, despite the lack of a strong unified government. So despite the lack of a unified government, the social hierarchy kept order in India. So let's look at this hierarchy because it does look a little different. So here is the Indian social hierarchy. Again, we're going to draw a triangle, and we're going to divide the triangle into 4 pieces, just like we did above.
Teachers, if you're still on campus, please make sure that you're putting your dirty microfiber towels in the bucket by the door so that the custodial staff can quickly pick them up for washing. Please make sure that you have your dirty microfiber towels in your bucket by the door. Thank you.
Okay, so here is the Indian social hierarchy. At the top of the Indian social hierarchy, we don't find the ruling class, we find the priests. We find the priests. And the reason we find the priests at the top of the social hierarchy is because it is a religious hierarchy. And the priests are the ones who talk about religion, and they help to maintain the social hierarchy. So, of course, they're going to put themselves at the top of it. Beneath the priests, we are going to find the soldiers. Just like we saw the military kind of being in the second spot in a general social hierarchy, we're also going to see them in this second spot here in India. Beneath them, we're also going to see what we see in the general hierarchy. We're going to see the merchants and other rich people. And then beneath them, we're going to find the farmers and the laborers. This social hierarchy maintains order in India. Now, this is meant to, in the religious tradition of India, which we're going to spend time talking about separately in 2 weeks, I think, this is supposed to resemble a person. So the priests are the mouth, because they're the ones telling everyone how to do stuff. The soldiers are the arms. Soldiers use arms. These guys are maybe most baffling, are the thighs. And these people are the feet, because they support everyone else. And so it's kind of easy to see that this is a religious tradition. So the religious, a cultural thing, and the social thing are kind of intertwining to give us a social hierarchy in India. So what the caste system does for us is it helps to maintain order. So it helps to maintain order. It also helps maintain patriarchy. There's no room for women in this social hierarchy. Women can't be priests. Women can't be soldiers. Women typically aren't merchants. You might see women as farmers, but definitely not in charge of a farm. They would be helping on a farm, much like women would help in a hunter-gatherer society, because the poor people need everyone to pitch in. So this helps to maintain patriarchy, and we even see that in some of the religious texts of Hinduism, which is the main religion of India at the time. So India is our example of a social hierarchy, and this social hierarchy is what keeps India together, even though they don't have this strong unified government. So this is the power of a social hierarchy. You can use this to maintain order even with the lack of a strong government. So this is the power of society, that there are social expectations and social rules that can maintain order despite the lack of an actual law keeping you from doing something. So if we think about this in terms of something like Hammurabi's Code or the Ten Commandments, these are kind of like unwritten rules. You follow this social hierarchy because the community expects you to, not because there's an actual law that tells you to do it. Okay, so we're going to stop here. This will be our social introduction. Uh, the next video will be about economics, and it will be a little bit more in depth because we will talk about agriculture and trade and innovation and look at China as an example of that. So there's a lot of stuff to cover. We might break that into 2 different videos, but we'll see how that goes. So until then, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.